Birds flying high, you know how I feel. Sun in the sky, you know how I feel. Breeze drifting on by, you know how I feel. It's a new dawn, it's a new day, it's a new life for me, and I'm feeling good. Fish in the sea, you know how I feel.
¡Qué bien me siento! I feel so good, and we are all going to feel really, really good. That's the way we already feel. And why is that? Because we're back here with the thinking party. As you very well know, after 3 years, the thinking party had to come back to life. We couldn't survive without our thinking party. That party for thought, that party where we think, we interact, we share, and we just feel different after being here, after participating in this party. And as you very well know, the main objective is to show how thought and technology can go hand in hand and contribute with tons of wisdom to all of those who are eager to know. In this session, in today's session, we will see how the brain, and thanks to technology and thanks to our better knowledge of the brain, it is in a way causing a revolution in society. We will have international speakers here, world-level intellectuals. We will have tons of fun. My name is Almudena Bermejo. I'm the director of this space, and I introduce the one who's going to steer this rank of wonderful participants, our friend Mara Torres. The interpreters apologize, but we are not receiving any sound right now. We'll try to solve the issue as soon as possible. Thank you.
Actitud, y ahora nos enfrentamos.
And now we need to approach the brain. The brain is that enigma, that mystery that scientists have been trying to solve for years and time. As Almudena said, we have 10 wonderful speakers in all senses, especially because they're going to talk about brains, about the brain from very different angles. We have mentalists. We have experts in virtual reality. We also have a stand-up comedian. We have an educator. And someone with whom we're going to do a joint exercise about mindfulness to see how we can harness our brain, how we can really learn to focus and to think. We'll see videos that will find the boundaries between the different spheres of life. We have games, but most importantly, we have 2 winners of the Prince of Asturias Prize, Javier Luxor and Antonio Damasio. They are going to explain to us how the brain has evolved through millions and millions of years, and how this links up with emotions, with decisions, with time, with the way we relate to the world. As I said in the beginning, I think this is one of the most suggestive thinking parties. They all are. But I don't know, maybe because I'm a journalist, I think the brain always provides very good headlines. The heart has very good literature, but in the news, it's even better. Just the other day, on Thursday, I decided to check how many news there would be, including the word brain, and I found 300,000 hits. The brain for bionic legs wins the prize Princess of Asturias. In La Vanguardia, it said, why do you feel like your brain freezes when you eat ice cream? In another newspaper, there was a headline that said, this is how Facebook's likes influence your brain. And in another newspaper, it said, the brain, an idea factory. And El País had one of the most read news, which is, this is the way a soccer player's brain functions. So we're talking about a very interesting topic for people. Apparently, we like to read about it. These were the trending news that day. And it is also quite specific that we try to link our brains to culture, social relationships, exercise, and so on. We have a thrilling session ahead of us. It's going to be a long day. We are starting now and we will finish about 7 in the afternoon, but it's going to be fruitful, just like any other thinking party that we do. We will remember the contents for 1 year. We will try to stick to time. All our speakers know that we need to abide by the schedule. I will try to keep track of time, but I kindly ask speakers to please abide by the time. So our first speaker is a stand-up comedian, a comedian who's asking himself one question, a question that you have probably posed yourself before. Do we really use just 10% of our brain? Well, Pablo Recheguren is one of those stars who has come from the Think Lab. It's an experiment that worked out really well. It's an international experience that works greatly, and they foster stand-up comedians that make us understand science in a fun way, in a familiar way. He was a finalist in the 2015 competition. He's going to try to help us find an answer to that question. Do we really use 10% of our brain only? So Pablo Recheguren kicks off this thinking party. Thank you.
Buenos días. Bueno, como...
Good morning. As you've already heard, my name is Pablo. I am a member of Big Band with V, as for van. And, well, I'm a stand-up comedian, but I'm also a scientist. And I'm also a bit geeky. Being a geek is quite hard. Actually, I love to play video games. And my girlfriend just the other day, by the way, scientist can have a girlfriend. She needs to be a scientist too, because if she likes humanities, the relationship will work. But we do like to have partners. And she said, Pablo, if you had to choose between video games and sex, what would you choose? And of course, I looked at her straight in the eye and I said, well, honey, I love you, but I've been surviving without sex for a very long time in my life, but not without video games. And that was a down spiral for my relationship. That's a problem that we have when you're a geek. Also, I like to go on the internet, and when you browse the internet, you find very interesting things, but there's also a lot of information that big bun guys call semi-science. It's not really science, it's not really anything, but nevertheless it's kind of believable. I'm a neurobiologist, and I found this statement that says that we use only 10% of our brain, and as we develop our skills, we will probably try to get to 100% of usage, and we will possibly improve. This is an idea that you'll see in books, in movies, in which Scarlett Johansson is the key actress, But it also says very obvious things. Brain injury, no matter how small it is, where it is, it's normally quite serious. If this is true, you can really shoot people in the head walking down the street. And, well, you know, everybody has a hobby, but normally the bullet would go through brain tissue that's unused, and nothing would really happen, actually. So as you can see, using only 10% of your brain is completely fake. All of us use 100% of our brains, and some proof more for it than others. But where does this idea come from? Well, partly it comes from a classic idea, thinking that the brain works as a full structure, instead of considering it a structure that has different sections that fulfill different functions. Now scientists know that when we use the sense of sight, as you're doing now, an area is activated above your neck, which is called the primary visual cortex. But now I'm also using language. So I'm activating other areas, like one that's located over here, called the Broca area. And if I had an injury in the Broca area, I wouldn't develop visual problems, I would develop language or speech problems, because the rather is not really a structure that works all together as a block. It rather works on the basis of sections that fulfill different functions. But what we do is to light up those different areas, but we also turn off those areas depending on what we are doing. So if you think about it for a second, the brain is like a flat, like an apartment. Imagine an apartment that has different rooms, and if you want to cook, you don't light up the lights for the whole flat, because that's going to really not be cost effective. So you just light up the lights in the kitchen. So that's the way the brain works too. And working in this manner, it also wastes a lot of energy, because the brain amounts for 2 or 3% of your body weight. If you're like me, if you're big-headed, you will raise the average, and our brains weigh a bit more. Even though it's 2% of our body weight, it consumes 25% of our metabolism. It doesn't matter what you're doing. It doesn't matter if you're sleeping, if you're awake, if you're having a great physical activity or sitting down, if you're studying, reading brainy books or watching TV. Consumption rarely changes, but what does change is the part of the brain that it lights up or turns off. And if you consider that for a second, if you consider that that question, whether we only use 10% of our brain and the energy consumption is so high, what would happen? Well, what would happen is that your energy consumption would peak, and you couldn't increase that peak no matter where you went, no matter if you went to a buffet and ate everything, you wouldn't have enough energy. But this gives rise to very absurd situations, because it would mean that you could use more percentage of your brain, you could use up more energy, you could lose weight by thinking, using your intellectual skills. And that would be quite nice, wouldn't it? Because you could go to the doctor, and the doctor would say, well, listen, it's not really that you're growing stronger, you're getting fatter, but do not worry. Because do you watch TV? Do you watch soap operas? Well, stop watching soap operas and just watch documentaries and read Russian literature classics. You start reading Dostoevsky for half an hour a day, and you will slowly increase your reads. If you don't feel so good, then stop, but you would lose weight by doing that. But as a person who's read The Hobbit and The Silmarillion 3 times, and also all the series of Game of Thrones and The Lord of the Rings, allow me to tell you, reading books does not make you lose weight. It doesn't work. But apart from all these problems, all the structural problems that the brain is facing, there's also something that is true, which is that only about 10% of the brain cells are neurons. The other cells are glial cells. But they're not very well valued, because everybody wants these cells to work as if they were neurons. There are 2 problems, because this transition is not possible biologically speaking. And also glial cells already have very important functions. But here something happens. I call it the Jennifer Lopez light technician effect. You will now understand it. Imagine that this is a show, a Jennifer Lopez show, and I have 3,000 people in front of me, a microstructure down here, 50 musicians playing back there, and to the side I have some men showing their chest and flipping their fans, and there's a microstructure of lights and sounds above me controlled by people. And in the center of the whole show, it's me, Jennifer Lopez. Now I'm a scientist and I'm going to make the extra effort, but I'm dancing, okay? You're all my supporters. You're saying, oh, J-Lo, I love you. You're here because of me. You're looking at me. No one's thinking, oh, the guy who's playing the clarinet, he's playing so well. No one's saying, oh, the guy playing with, dancing with the fans, he's dancing so well. And there's never, ever anyone who says, I have been following the whole tour because of the light technician. Because it changes from red to green and red to green all over again on the fourth song. But all those people who are behind the scenes, all those people have key functions so that the final result is clearly spectacular. But the same happens to the brain. Maybe glial functions are intuitively not so fancy, but they are support functions that are very important for neurons to be able to do their job, because these cells are trying to feed neurons by recovering parts of those neurons or maybe filtering things that can get to the brain. So glial cells are already part of that 100% of brain power that we use. If you think about it, that's a downer, because sometimes people say, okay, I thought I could have some room for improvement. But if you're already telling me that I'm using up all my brain power, then there's no hope for me. But I don't want to leave you with that negative message, because in Big Van, we are... in spite of being Spanish scientists, we are optimists, okay? And we are positive. So we consider that the brain is something that is plastic. It has been 100% developed to create new neuronal connections. And that enables humans to learn so that bit by bit we can progressively improve. If you want to use up 100% of your brain, what you have to do is to stimulate it constantly, to challenge it with new things, with exciting things like coming to a thinking party event. Thank you very much, everybody.
Gracias, Pablo. Pues te diré que nuestro siguiente invitado también es...
Our next guest is another optimist who's an optimist in spite of being a scientist too. Because if there's something that really characterizes Juan Luis Arzuaga, is that he always tells things with a smile. You will see it. He's one of the most important paleoanthropologists in the world, but this country really owes him lots. Thanks to Arzuaga, Spain is heading human evolution research from Atapuerca in Burgos. He is managed to awaken our interest to know who we are and where we come from. He got Prince of Asturias Award in 1997, but he's got dozens of international awards, and he's a member of one of the most prestigious scientific institutions worldwide. He's currently the scientific director of the Human Evolution Museum. But I always say that Juan Luis Arzuaga, above all those things, he is a human being who's passionate about human beings and all their dimensions. His research shows us not just how our ancestors were, but rather how they lived each other, how they fought each other, how they coexisted, how they organized themselves in family groups. Now he's going to tell us about the journey of our brains, how the brains were back then and how they are now. It's always a pleasure and a privilege to have Javier Arzuaga with us. Where is he? Good morning. I'm also going to act as a stand-up comedian here. I hope you're interested. I don't think it would be as interested as Pablo's stand-up comedy session, but I would like to talk to you about what the brain does. The brain is an organ that consumes stories. As people who say that it's a metapoietic organ. It means that it produces myths and it consumes myths, and the brain is really eager to consume stories. But the good piece of news is that if the brain has a good story to tell, it's a gold mine, because there's nothing that a brain would love more or yearn more for than a good story. So you already know it, and this is increasingly the case in the time of communications, where information channels and communication channels have multiplied in number. A good story has even more value because it can get to a lot of people, and because there's nothing that we yearn more for, because we're constantly telling each other stories. We're always gossiping at any level. Those are still stories. We're interested in other people's lives, in close relatives, colleagues, and neighbors' stories. But other stories are also interesting for us too, and this has a reason for it, because we might be interested in knowing what people that we interact with are thinking, why they're there, why they aren't there. But we're also interested about gossip, about people who we don't really know, or things that haven't really happened yet, imaginary things. For instance, Anna Karenina, she didn't exist, but millions of people have read and will continue to read her story, simply because it's a good story. But it's a story that has never happened, and we want to know how it ends. And I won't make any spoilers. I won't tell you how it ends. But the same would happen with Madame Bovary. That lady didn't exist ever. She didn't live ever. But you cannot stop reading the book until you don't find out what happens in the end, how an invented story, a made-up story, finishes. And that happens because the brain is really eager to feed from stories. And as I said, this is very good news for storytellers. Like in prehistory, like shamans. Shamans have now brighter future than ever, because now we have the possibility of getting to a global tribe. And tribes used to be smaller in size. They had fewer members. Now we can get to everybody. So if you can come up with a good story, if that is what you want, then you can really become filthy rich. Also, sports are very good sources of stories. You always want to see the end of the game. You are always interested in the story in that game, in that confrontation, in that challenge. And what surrounds it? Apparently human beings love stories. And let me take it a step further, because stories are the first sector of world economy. And I always try to explain to politicians that economy is not about factories with chimneys that pollute the air. That already happened in the Industrial Revolution. Right now, the economy revolves around stories, tourism, shows, art, strips. Perhaps also technologies that pay service to stories, such as IT and general technologies, which are supports to convey those stories. So ultimately, economically, this is the most important sector that there is, and we should already leave behind the idea of the fact that economy is about producing industrial objects. We must realize that we have gone back to square one. We're back to desiring anything that could give us a good story. So what I'm going to try to do is to give you a story so that you can leave this session with a new story that you might not be acquainted with. This is a story of two colleagues or friends. They were colleagues, but they were also friends. They were British, and their names were Darwin and Wallace. They co-discovered the theory of evolution through natural selection. They didn't really discover evolution. They just discovered the mechanism that explains evolution. So for scientists, what really matters are mechanisms. Until you don't get to know the law that produces the phenomena that we observe, you cannot really say that you have done a scientific discovery. Observing reality is not science per se. That's a problem that science tackles. But what science wants to do is to discover how the world works, to determine what are the rules that determine observable phenomena and the matter that we know. And these two gentlemen, these two biologists, have made history because independently, but rather coinciding in time, they discovered the cause, so to speak, of evolution, which is the beginning of natural selection. What does that have to do with the brain? Well, this is something that we are going to delve deeper into right now. One of them, Alfred Russel Wallace, he submitted a letter from Lost Isla in the Molucci Islands to Charles Darwin, as you can see here in this image. And when Darwin read the letter, he was positively surprised and also a bit disappointed to realize that what Wallace had found was the same mechanism that he had been elaborating and developing for many years. He was trying to put into words natural selection. So from that point on, a series of events were triggered. They presented a joint memo that went completely unnoticed. By the way, everything needs to be mentioned. And it was followed by the publication of The Origin of Species, which is Darwin's book. But that's not the story that I wanted to tell you. The story that I'm going to tell you is much more interesting than this. This is just the backdrop. I would like you to hear a story that not very many people know about, because many people have tried to understand this, and apparently I'm the only one who's realized this. Well, no, and not just the only one, but they tell the story in a different manner, and it's not easily understood. So I'm going to tell you the story so that you can share it. Okay. So Darwin published The Origin of Species, and he just makes one mention to human evolution, and that mention is that sentence. It says, "Light will be thrown on the origin of man and his history." Later on, Darwin said that he was not referring to human evolution because he didn't want to distort the discussion, and he just wanted to go over it lightly. But this is the only sentence that makes a reference to our evolutionary origin at the social and popular level. Everybody got the conclusion after reading The Origin of Species that the key message delivered by the book was that we come from the monkey. And that's why the message that stuck. So he didn't manage to really prevent that discussion from happening. But the sentence goes beyond this message, because Darwin says that the theory of evolution based on natural selection, it will shed light on man and his mental abilities. This is something that has been proven already by certain models. But specifically, what Darwin says is that the origin of the body and of the human mind will someday be explained in this manner. That's what he suggests, that it will be explained through natural selection and mental skills. There were some discrepancies between them too. We'll see why. Between Darwin and Wallace, because both of them had very similar experiences. Nevertheless, their perceptions were a bit different. The same phenomena were approached from different angles. Both of them were great travelers. Apparently, to develop the theory of evolution, it is essential to travel. But it's not really the case. Both of them could have come up with the same theory of traveling around Madrid, because the remarks that they made, especially the ones made by Darwin that had to do with paleontology and biogeography, those are observations or remarks that he could have come up with in England. But the journey provided other experiences, and after returning from the trip, Darwin started to elaborate his theories. And everybody thinks about the Galapagos Islands and these birds, who were the trigger or the catalyst of the theory of evolution, and it's roughly true. But the Galapagos didn't influence him a lot when he was there, but later down the road he started thinking about geographical variation and about species production. But I wanted to elaborate on the concept of Darwin and the savages. There's to say, the primitive tribes and the hunters and collectors tribe, or the hunters and gatherers tribes, and how that triggered that evolutionary thought in relationship with human mind. Darwin had the opportunity to get to know in the southern corn in the Beagle Channel, that gives the name to his boat. He met an indigenous culture, which is the Yamana Indians. Here we have some pictures of the last Yamana in the Beagle Channel. And we are talking about the most meridional human beings on Earth. No one live more at a more southern area. And the climate is very complicated because it gets kind of cold, it's windy, and it's kind of depressive for Westerners, I'd say. Indeed, the first captain of the Beagle, he committed suicide over there because he couldn't stand it. He couldn't bear that solitude and how remote that place was. And in such a hostile environment, this culture lived. This is the way they looked. They were hunters and gatherers, and Darwin considered that they were the most primitive form of human beings, and he included them in his evolutionary theory to demonstrate that our mental capabilities had developed from levels or stages like the ones represented back in their day in the 19th century, represented by the Yamana, to the most advanced technologies or cultures in the planet, which were the British guys for them, who obviously represented the summit of cultural and technological development and scientific development back then. So they use these guys in subsequent writings, particularly in a subsequent book that focuses on discussing the origin of men, and he considers that they're like a link, like the lost link. They are like the proof that we have evolved. We've had phases in which we were like the Yamana, like the Yamana Indians, but we have evolved throughout time. This gentleman is Alfred Russel Wallace. He went to Indonesia, and Darwin had advanced moral ideas. He was against slavery. He came from a militant family. They were really against slavery. But he was an aristocrat. That was his social class. The only title that Darwin uses, because he was never a doctor or a professor or a PhD, the only title that he used was that of squire. So he was part of the rural nobility, the rural hierarchy, and Wallace, he had a humble life, and he had to make a living by working. So he was traveling the world by trying to provide materials to private collectors and to museums. He tried to locate strange animals and strange plants from the most remote corners of the world, and that's how he got to Ternate, to the Molucca Islands. I don't know how the Moluccan pronounce this, but he lived in this shack, and he says that there was one night when he was feeling sick. He had malaria, he had a fever, and that night he foresaw the history of the theory of evolution, and he was enlightened with this theory. And Wallace had got in contact with primitive tribes in the area, but before this he had visited the Amazonia, and he was not traveling with a British Army boat. He paid for his trips. He was a businessman. He was rather a freelancer. He financed his own expeditions. And then he had to sell his products to continue to live, to make a living. And, well, his contact with scientists or with the tribes was way close. And he met the Dayak in Borneo, and the Papuas in Nueva Guinea, New Guinea, and his perception was the opposite of Darwin. But they were not just intelligent for practical things, but they were also able to have abstract thinking. They had musical attitudes, technological attitudes, learning capabilities, and he was like a British knight in a way. And that led him to deviate from the theory of natural selection that he had created himself to explain the origin of human minds. Because Wallace said, how is it possible that these capabilities have developed in this environment, in this ecological environment, in this social environment where these tribes live in conditions which were very difficult. He said that an orangutan's mind would have been enough for them to survive. So what was the purpose of all this in the theory of evolution? We must say that this theory is an adaptive theory. It explains all the changes that take place in functional terms. And that always entails an improvement. Natural selection, therefore, fosters individuals so that they can adapt and survive in better conditions. So the question is, how is it possible that the individuals that had the best musical skills have been selected, or language skills? What was the purpose of that in that environment? If the orangutan's brain would have been enough. I would like to take the chance to say that I was just about to write a book about that 10% of brain power that we consume, because for an evolutionary biologist this is a great challenge, because it's really difficult to produce a brain as an organ, and natural selection would have never promoted individuals who were wasteful. Natural selection is quite greedy, and it always tries to obtain immediate economic profit. It's very practical, so it's very difficult to explain this. Either all of our evolutionary theories are wrong, or that idea of using that 10% of our brain, it's nonsense. But I don't know if I'm going to write that book after your stand-up comedy session. But in short, what's the purpose of brains? I barely have any time left, but I would like to go through the history of brain briefly. The question that we need to ask ourselves is, why has the brain been selected? What has it been selected for? What was the adaptive advantage that our ancestors had by having cognitive or increased cognitive skills? There are two paradigms. First, we have the classic paradigm and the current paradigm. I'm going to just mention both of them. The classical paradigm talks about hunting. It talks about natural selection in typical Darwinist terms of the clash of species. So natural selection has made us wiser because we had to compete with other species, and intelligence apparently entails that you will be better fit to compete with other species. For an evolutionist biologist, this is an intuitive and a popular idea, but it doesn't really have any grounds. There are many bacteria who are going around, and they don't have a nervous system. There are rodents, there are insects of all kinds, and they are not really that skilled. And right now, there's many of us, but a few years ago, we were just not very successful organism, and we weren't true geographically present. But the thing is that we have become wiser, more intelligent, because we have to compete in this quest for life. We need to compete with other species. In technical terms, it is because the selection expressions that we received are typically called nature's hostile forces. Climate and different species. The problems the problems posed by the environment are the ones that have shaped us, because the environment, the physical environment, has had an impact on this development, as it happens with the rest of species. So adaptations have an environmental feature. All adaptations are environmental for Darwin because they have to do with the environmental niche. Species adapt to their environmental niche. So our adaptations, even our musical skills, should come with some type of environmental advantage. Language should have an advantage in terms of environmental adaptation, and this is the image that illustrates it. I would like to say that in this image there's only men are depicted here. So with this approach, the key player, the protagonist of a human evolution, and therefore the culprit of having developed such high cognitive skills is a man brain. Because women are not here. Because apparently with this approach we owe our cognitive skills to our grandfathers who were fighting elements, going through animals, going through great distances, facing great dangers, and maintaining their children and their wives, and they made it possible for us to survive. This is a hypothesis that was very popular in the 60s in many environments, actually. In the world of paleoanthropology, this is Damon Roard. This is an image of the movie 2001, and this theory is something that was greatly supported by Robert Ordry. It's a theory that has been present for quite a while. That hunter hypothesis, as we could call it. Here we have a picture that I enjoy quite a lot. These are primitive human-like forms going in the savannah. I don't really know what they're doing there in the savannah, but they're covered in hair. I imagine they would have been quite hot in the savannah back then, covered in hair. But they look quite fierce, and they have weapons to hunt with. Ultimately, this is something that chimpanzees also do, especially male chimpanzees. Here they're not even talking about females, nor about their kindred. But now I would like to mention another hypothesis, because I need to finish my talk. But I would like to mention this guy's theory. He is an entomology. He works in social issues, and this is a hypothesis that we have developed in this book, and it's called the hypothesis of social competence and environmental domain. He says that in human evolution there are two stages. One where we manage to rule other species, and therefore social competence starts. For many years, the adaptations of our ancestors were purely environmental. That is to say, we shouldn't try to find the origin of the standing posture in anything that relates to hunting. Here there is a picture that shows the first tools and the consumption of proteins and fat from animal origin, and that continues to evolve, but many years after our capabilities, that appears after many years after many capabilities arise, having nothing to do with hunting. But finally, species arise, and these are species that have gained environmental supremacy, so to speak. That goes to say that selection no longer comes from those environmental natural forces. Selection factors do not have to do with other species nor with climate. So what really has that pressure on evolution, on our ancestors, and what has really given rise to our features? Well, it's the social environment, because we go from a situation in which we had to compete environmentally, but now the situation says that we had to compete socially. This is Atapuerca. These are the fossils of that area where there's a lot of human there's a lot of human science. And Richard Alexander and many neurobiologists are asking themselves one question. One of the cool questions in social biology is, what's the purpose of being part of a group? Well, being social, being part of a group, follows the purpose of hunting, that is eating others, or not being eaten. Any of the two reasons are good. In our species, both reasons apply. There's one group that eats another group, and that's social competence. There's new skills, social skills, group skills, and within the group social skills too. All those skills are the ones that were selected in that environment, which is no longer the environmental environment. If a species is no species was really challenging the survival of our ancestors, that doesn't mean that you won't get eaten by a lion, but here we need to consider that environmental forces are not what determine our evolution or our selection. In Atapuerca, to conclude, we find other examples of what I was saying. Here we have another area called Cima de los Huesos, where there's examples that show that what they're selecting here is social skills from this point on, and it doesn't have anything to do with environment or with ecology. It doesn't really matter if the ecosystem is surrounded by pine cones, if it's tundra, if it's desert. It doesn't really matter. It says that the environment, the ecology, does not really count, because evolution is being directed by other area, which is the social area. For that area, for that level, the landscape is irrelevant. You could evolve equally in Iberia or in Greenland, and some very new skills appeared back then. Capabilities that have to do with the use of symbolic elements like feathers, as you see in the picture. And the questions that we ask ourselves is, when did language appear? When did it emerge? Because this is a skill that was selected in the social environment. So the question that we need to ask ourselves is whether this was a progressive evolution or it was faster at some points. Another question that we need to ask ourselves is if Neanderthals, to wrap up, if Neanderthals really had symbolic capabilities and language skills, because that's also symbolic. And here we have a story. Here we have a story to wrap up my talk. This is a story that talks about an encounter between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. And Homo sapiens, by the way, this happened in an actual area in France. And here they are, Neanderthals are being challenged with a necklace by Homo sapiens, and this child is given a strange look to the Homo sapiens, and he's possibly asking him, "What's this for? What's this this necklace for? Do you hunt better with that necklace? Are you less cold with that necklace? I don't know, can you do things better with that necklace? Or does it keep you protected? I don't know, is that a killer weapon? What is that? What's the practical effect of that? The Homo sapiens kids should have said, yes, with this necklace, you are less cold, you get less well, you hunt better, you live better, you eat better with this necklace. Because this is a social tool, it's social adaptation, and it's part of the phenotype that has been spread. Perhaps Neanderthals also used necklaces because they could have used symbolic objects, but that's something that we still need to have to research. But just to wrap up, what are the key features of human evolution? In what context have we developed our cognitive skills, such as language skills and others? What caused our brain to grow, if you want to look at it from that angle? Well, in this type of environment, such as the hunters, we have the last hunters and gatherers in the planet right there. Well, that's a social image of human evolution that resembles nothing like the first image that I showed here. We have a group of men and women who do their things, and that they relate to one another, and where emotional intelligence is the key factor to succeed. I really hope that you enjoyed my stories. Thank you.
It's amazing to consider that I'm holding in my hands the place where someone once felt, thought, and loved. For centuries, scientists have been battling to understand what this unappealing object is all about. What the object is all about.
But here is this massive jelly you can hold in the palm of your hand. And it can contemplate the vastness of interstellar space. Contemplate the vast. The brain has evolved from the inside out. Its structure reflects all the stages through which it has passed.
Information in the form of energy streams in simultaneously through all of our sensory systems in the form of energy. And then it explodes into this enormous collage of what this present moment looks like, what it feels like, and what it sounds like. It explodes into this enormous collage. And in this moment, we are perfect. We are whole, and we are beautiful.
It appears rather gruesome, wrinkles like a walnut, and with the consistency of mushrooms, like a walnut.
What we know is encoded in cells called neurons, and there are something like 100 trillion neural connections. This intricate and marvelous network of neurons has been called an enchanted loom. An enchanted loom. The neurons store sounds to snatches of music. Whole orchestras play inside our heads. 20 million volumes worth of information is inside the heads of every one of us. The brain is a very big place in a very small space.
Information in the form of energy streams in simultaneously through all of our sensory systems in the form of energy. And then it explodes into this enormous collage of what this present moment looks like, what it feels like, and what it sounds like.
No longer at the mercy of the reptile brain, we can change ourselves. Think of the possibilities.
Think of your brain as a newspaper. Think of all the information it can store, but it doesn't take up too much room because it's full. Think of all the information it can store.
We see with the eyes, but we see with the brain as well. And seeing with the brain is often called imagination.
The brain can contemplate the vastness. The brain has evolved in successive stages.
And we are beautiful.
Think of all the information it can store.
And then it explodes into this enormous collage. And in this moment, we are perfect. We are whole, and we are beautiful.
It is the most mysterious part of the human body, and yet it dominates the way we live our adult lives. It is the brain.
En esta caja de sorpresa.
On this surprise box that is thinking body, we find this kind of singing symphony of body that consecrated to the brain, that is the one that we are delivering at the end of this conference. And I was thinking about that color thing, necklace thing, and the answer should have been yes. The color helps you to hunt better, to have a better relationship with the rest of the tribe, and to survive, of course. And the brain, as he was saying at the beginning of his conference, is eager for stories. And after these first three ones of this morning, we are giving the floor to a woman that is going to tackle one of the biggest issues and topics in this subject currently, that is virtual reality. And virtual reality is all around. Everybody wants to talk about it. Nuria Oliver is studying the links between brain and technology. She's an engineer in telco and a doctor on the MIT, Massachusetts Institute, and she's brilliant. She's researching on the influence of the brain knowledge and influence that has in the way we relate with gadgets. And I am eager to have Nuria here to listen what she has to say about this. You're not talking about virtual reality. Oh no, you cannot tell me that. You have to include that in your speech. Come here. But of course you have to include virtual reality in your speech. No, but then brain and technology. No, it's not the topic of today's speech. It's a mystery today's speech. Thank you very much for your introduction. And I am going to talk about technology and the brain and beyond virtual reality. We know that the brain has 86,000 million neurons and more than 100 billion connections. But beyond that, as we were watching in the video, the brain is kept one of the biggest mysteries of human being. Starting from the first reference about the brain in an Egyptian papyrus from 17th century before Christ until the latest discoveries of the 20th century, we've had various theories about the function of the brain and the value of the brain in the society. And what is undoubtedly is that thanks to technology we've come to understand how the brain works. And when Pablo said that the brain is composed of different parts that work differently, it's all thanks to technology. And today I'm going to talk about how technology is providing us with the ways to better understand the brain. First of all, non-invasive technologies that we are using for understanding the brain, but later on I'm going to include semi-invasive technologies that we are using to stimulate the brain. After, we are going to talk about the way we have to increase the power of the brain, and later I'm going to abord the technologies that we are using to duplicate, to simulate the functioning of the brain. Because this is the objective. If we take a look to technologies, most popular technologies to analyze the functioning of the brain in past, the way to do it was very invasive. We had to open the head of the poor guy to understand the brain. But today we have so many other technologies and resources to understand the way the brain works, and we use different approaches to. The first technology that I am going to tackle is the MRI technology, high resolution technology. And what we do with this is that we have an analysis of the differences of the blood flux in the brain, and that's what these machines can detect with these huge machines. And this is used to medically analyze our brains. For example, this is an MRI when a people is looking to faces, and these are the patterns that we receive of the image, and this leads us to a better understanding of the way of recognition of the brain. Another technique that we use to recover these changes of pattern of blood patterns in the blood, we have here an infrared technology. And we are not using magnetic fields in this case. We are using this ultra-red light. And based on this, we can detect activation patterns, with the advantage that this can be more portable device than the MRI machine. This is a video about two violin players. And these two musicians are playing, and while they're playing, we are analyzing the way the brains function. And here you can see how the different parts of the brain are activated while they play. And this is the first time we are able to do this in the human history.
So this helps to understand the value of music for us as human beings. Another technique that we use that has also a magnetic basic fundament is this encephalographic magnetoencephalography, MEG, and is a very has a very high resolution. And the last one, that the most popular one, is the electroencephalogram, that is used not magnetical, either optical, is electrical. And then we have this drawing and this activation of the brain will give this paper final result. This is accessible for many in everywhere, and for less than 1,000 euros, for example. It's all about wearing this cask, and it will measure the electrical impulses on the brain. And this is quite important. This has a very good temporal resolution, and you can detect life events, but it has very bad resolution, spatial resolution, because you cannot have the, for example, if you blink, it obviously this is a brain function too, and it will interfere in the final result. So what we have here is a mix of neuronal activity in the graphic, and what we get when we use this technique is to develop these neuronal interfaces. If we are able to detect in a non-invasive way and a cheap way the brain activity, and we can interpret this will allow us to do things about thinking on them without having to tape, without having to talk, without having to do anything at all. And this is an example of what we were doing at the University of Minnesota, and the student is driving a drone without using his hands. He is just thinking about the drone going upward, downward, and he is driving the drone and piloting the drone only with his brain. It's almost fiction, science fiction. And we are using pattern recognition to interpret all these signals and piloting the drone. The second area is not only detecting what is happening in the brain, but also stimulating the brain. One of the non-invasive techniques is the magnetic transcranial stimulation, or TMS, where you put this electromagnetic bobine in the brain, and depending on the creation of an electromagnetic field or on the non-creation of it, it creates a current that will stimulate your brain without having to operate you, to intervene chirurgically. So this volunteer lady is going to have in the cortex area this
con la bobina electromagnética. Ella involuntariamente va moviendo el brazo porque están activando la parte del cerebro que le dice que mueva el brazo.
Here we go. So right hand,
según va moviendo, va controlando diferentes partes del cuerpo, ¿no? Luego pasa, este sería para el hemisferio, el brazo derecho, hemisferio izquierdo, y luego hemisferio izquierdo, brazo derecho, o al revés, hemisferio derecho, brazo izquierdo. Ahora ha pasado al otro hemisferio y entonces le está haciendo que se mueva este brazo de una manera totalmente no invasiva, ¿no? Simplemente activando esa parte del cerebro. Si somos capaces de interpretar lo que estábamos pensando utilizando, por ejemplo, electroencefalografía, y somos capaces de estimular el cerebro utilizando, por ejemplo, TMS, podríamos pensar en tener una comunicación de cerebro a cerebro, donde yo estoy pensando algo, el sistema lo interpreta y a usted le estimula en el cerebro y entonces recibiría la información que estoy pensando. Y aunque parezca ciencia ficción, esto es algo que ya se ha investigado y ya se ha probado, y de hecho uno de los experimentos que ha habido involucra un equipo español de Starlab, donde efectivamente esto es lo que se hizo. En el equipo emisor, la persona llevaba un electroencefalograma y pensaba algo, y en el equipo receptor la persona tenía TMS y le estimulaban la parte del cerebro, dos diferentes partes del cerebro, para permitirle diferenciar entre dos unidades de información diferentes. Ahora la cantidad de información que se ha podido transmitir es muy pequeña, pero conforme somos capaces de interpretar cada vez mejor lo que estamos pensando y de estimular de una manera cada vez más fina el cerebro del receptor, podríamos pensar en tener una comunicación telepática, ¿no? Otra técnica de estimulación que es más invasiva es la optogenética. Y es muy interesante porque lo que se combinan es la genética con la óptica. Y lo que se hace es que se coge un gen de una proteína, de un alga, que es sensible a la luz azul. Y lo que sucede es que cuando se expone luz azul a esta proteína, entonces se ioniza, que quiere decir que sería conductivo y ayudaría a tener una conductividad eléctrica, ¿no? Entonces, si este gen se introduce en ciertas neuronas, cuando estas neuronas son expuestas a la luz azul, entonces se activarían y podrías, de una manera externa, estimular un cerebro, ¿no? Encendiendo la luz o apagando la luz. Esto solamente se ha hecho hasta ahora en animales y en ratas porque es invasiva. Tienes que modificar el ADN o introducir genes, ¿no?, en neuronas y demás. Pero voy a mostrar este experimento de Cambridge, donde a esta rata le han introducido este implante de optogenética. Entonces, cuando está encendido y está estimulado el cerebro, lo que hace la rata es que tiene un movimiento circular. Están activando la parte del cerebro que le hace que vaya dando vueltas. Y cuando lo apagan, esa parte no está activa y entonces la rata se mueve espontáneamente, ¿no? Es un vídeo muy cortito, espero que se vea. Ahora está activo y entonces la rata está haciendo este movimiento circular. Y ahora cuando lo detienen, la rata ya no da vueltas. Ahora se va para el otro lado. Entonces, no es algo que veremos en el corto plazo probablemente en humanos, pero es una de las técnicas que se pueden utilizar para estimular el cerebro. La siguiente área donde la tecnología está teniendo mucho impacto es en la cognición aumentada. Este es un concepto de mediados del siglo XX y, de hecho, DARPA, el Departamento de Defensa americano, alrededor del año 2000, creó un programa específico de Augmented Cognition, de cómo utilizar tecnología para aumentar nuestras capacidades cognitivas. Esta es una imagen que son muy graciosas, estas postales del siglo XIX, donde imaginaban el futuro. Y este es el mundo en el año 2000. O sea, nosotros ya estamos mucho más en el futuro. Esto sería el futuro de la educación, donde el profesor está introduciendo libros en esta máquina, hay un alumno, no sé cómo se elige ese alumno, que da vueltas a la manivela y de alguna manera el conocimiento se transmite al cerebro, ¿no?, de los estudiantes. Y aunque parezca ciencia ficción, se parece un poco a los cascos de electroencefalografía, ¿no?, que he enseñado, y la idea de cognición aumentada es en este sentido, es decir, podríamos de alguna manera aumentar nuestras capacidades cognitivas. Las áreas donde más impacto está teniendo esto es obviamente en personas cuyas capacidades cognitivas tienen algún tipo de dificultad, ¿no?, o deficiencia. Una de las áreas más comerciales es el área que se llama interfaces neuronales o feedback neuronal, donde lo que haces es que te monitorizas cierta actividad neuronal y recibes el feedback para recibir un entrenamiento. Por ejemplo, esto se utiliza mucho con niños que tienen el déficit de atención. Ahora lo veréis en un vídeo. Juegan un videojuego en el que solamente se mueve en este caso es un cohete, si el niño está enfocado. ¿Y cómo sabe el sistema si el niño está enfocado o no? Porque están monitorizando su actividad cerebral, de manera que solamente cuando el patrón de actividad cerebral significa que está enfocado, juega el videojuego. Lo podéis ver aquí.
The client can learn how to train and regulate his brain activity.
Y la idea es que practicando este tipo de videojuegos aprendes a ser más consciente de tu propio estado emocional o de tu estado mental, ¿no? Y en este caso de capacidad de atención y de enfocarse en algo. Y es una alternativa a la farmacología, ¿no?, y a las medicinas. Es un ejemplo de la señal en tiempo real. Otra técnica mucho más primitiva y mucho más temprana para la cognición aumentada y que se está investigando sobre todo en el contexto militar son los traductores ultrasónicos capacitivos, donde la idea es que puedan mejorar el estado de alerta o incluso puedan mejorar nuestra percepción utilizando este tipo de tecnología. Y en el contexto militar, sobre todo el Departamento de Defensa americano, está muy interesado en este tipo de tecnologías. Y finalmente, aunque parezca ciencia ficción, esto es una realidad desde hace muchos años, son los implantes cerebrales, donde implantamos tecnología en nuestro cerebro para suplir una funcionalidad o una capacidad no existente. Uno de los más populares son los implantes cocleares, donde gracias a los implantes cocleares, personas que no pueden oír son capaces de oír, ¿no? O implantes retinales, que son más recientes, donde personas que no pueden ver, gracias a la tecnología, pueden ver, o lo que se conoce como Deep Brain Stimulation, donde se estimulan ciertas partes del cerebro para tratar enfermedades psiquiátricas o neurológicas, como por ejemplo Parkinson's. Voy a mostrar unos vídeos, porque la verdad es que son muy emotivos, de personas que pueden ver por primera vez o que pueden escuchar por primera vez gracias a estos implantes.
So now technically your device is on.
Ella oye por primera vez su propia voz, porque era sorda y gracias a un implante coclear oye su voz por primera vez. Es increíble el valor de la tecnología, ¿no? Que nos permita...
Daddy loves you. Daddy.
Usa el lenguaje de signos, ¿no? Porque es como se ha estado comunicando hasta ese momento. Ahora viene algo que no está relacionado con el cerebro, bueno, quizás sí, pero no es un implante cerebral, sino que esto es un exoesqueleto. Y gracias a los exoesqueletos esta persona puede volver a caminar. Un exoesqueleto es un sistema robótico, como un esqueleto, pero que va por fuera. Y este señor, por primera vez, puede ver a su hija desde 1978, en que perdió la visión, gracias a un implante retinal.
Yeah. Actually, yeah. 1, 2.
Oh my God. Hi, Dad.
Entonces, la capacidad de la tecnología para aumentarnos, ¿no? Sobre todo cuando tenemos alguna deficiencia, es increíble. Y otro área donde se están produciendo grandes avances es en las prótesis neuronales, donde lo que se hace es poder controlar una prótesis, un brazo artificial o una pierna artificial, y de hecho se ha mencionado Hugh Herf, que ganó el premio Princesa de Asturias, que lleva investigando precisamente en este campo muchos años, simplemente utilizando el cerebro. De nuevo, si somos capaces de interpretar la actividad neuronal y si soy capaz de determinar que estoy pensando que se mueva mi brazo, esa información la puedo transmitir a un brazo prostético y hacer que el brazo prostético se mueva. Y esto es en lo que consiste esta idea de poder tener neuroprótesis. Voy a mostrar un vídeo muy pionero de Johns Hopkins University, donde es uno de los primeros brazos prostéticos controlados con la mente.
I used to be a salesman, and in 2005
esta persona perdió su brazo y está controlando el brazo totalmente pensando en mover el brazo. Piensa, mano ciérrate, mano ábrete, mano ve para arriba, brazo ve para abajo. Esa información se interpreta y se transmite al brazo biónico para que el brazo lo haga. Es muy difícil, habla de que le lleva horas y horas y horas de entrenamiento, porque claro, él no tiene el feedback, aunque hay investigación para proporcionarle el feedback, él no sabe cómo de fuerte está apretando. Y entonces si se pasa, a la persona a la que le esté dando la mano le puede estrujar la mano. Y algo que es muy interesante, voy a dejarlo para que se vea, y eso no lo podemos hacer ninguno de nosotros, es que él puede mover su brazo, aunque el brazo no esté pegado a su cuerpo, porque la comunicación con el brazo es wireless. Entonces hay un momento en que el brazo está por ahí y él está controlando el brazo. Ahora lo veréis.
We're attaching a prosthetic device to an implant that protrudes out of his skin and allows the prosthesis to actually be physically attached to his skeleton.
Algo también que está comentando que es pionero es que el brazo está implantado directamente en su hueso. Esto de aquí está directamente implantado en el hueso. Entonces realmente es como si formase parte de su esqueleto. Ahora lo veréis cómo mueve el brazo remotamente, que eso es súper... Ahora,
For this, he had to undergo another surgery to rearrange the nerves from his missing arm.
All right, so we'll start with new movement. Ready?
Ahora piensa que se mueva y el brazo se mueve y el brazo está en otro sitio que no está conectado a su cuerpo, ¿no? Y eso no lo podemos hacer ninguno de nosotros. Y la siguiente frontera en el contexto de los chips implantables es el utilizar nanotecnología, que es tecnología del tamaño de un nanómetro, que es un tamaño atómico o molecular, y de hecho se habla también de nanorobots que podrían insertarse en nuestro cerebro y activar o desactivar neuronas según fuese necesario. Esto no es real, este vídeo, esto es una simulación en 3 dimensiones de un potencial nanorobot que se metería y se engancharía en las neuronas. Y podrías programáticamente determinar que hiciese lo que quisieses, ¿no? Sería como la siguiente generación de chips implantables. Y finalmente, en el contexto de la cognición aumentada, también está el concepto de la neurofarmacología, en el que se utilizarían fármacos específicos para dotarnos de capacidades especiales. Y probablemente una de las ideas más conocidas es la charla de TED de Nicolás Negroponte, del Media Lab de MIT, precisamente donde yo hice el doctorado, que habla de una píldora que nos podríamos tomar y aprender automáticamente un idioma, o aprender automáticamente cualquier disciplina. Y finalmente voy a hablar de la inteligencia artificial, que es el cuarta área tecnológica donde tiene una conexión con el cerebro, porque la idea es el poder replicar el cerebro, ¿no? La inteligencia artificial, según la definición de McCarthy, que es uno de los padres de la inteligencia artificial, sería la ciencia y la ingeniería para construir sistemas inteligentes. Tiene sus fundamentos en una gran variedad de disciplinas: la matemática, la filosofía, también la psicología cognitiva y obviamente la informática y la ingeniería. Tradicionalmente, cuando apareció a mediados del siglo XX, había dos escuelas. Una escuela que se llamaba NEETS, que era la inteligencia artificial simbólica, donde se utilizaba la lógica y el razonamiento lógico, y otra escuela que se llamaban Scruffies, donde lo que querían era aprender a partir de datos. Decía, los humanos aprendemos a partir de la percepción, tendríamos que hacer sistemas que pueden aprender a partir de datos. Y ha habido cierta rivalidad entre las dos escuelas. Hoy en día nos encontramos en un auge extraordinario de las técnicas que aprenden a partir de datos. Si queremos construir inteligencia artificial, nos tenemos que preguntar qué es lo que significa ser inteligente. Y obviamente la inteligencia es muy compleja, ¿no? Pero hay habilidades muy importantes que consideramos deberíamos incorporar en un sistema artificial para considerarlo inteligente. Y son habilidades muy difíciles de conseguir. Por ejemplo, la habilidad para buscar la mejor solución, resolver problemas, la capacidad de razonar, la creatividad, las emociones, la inteligencia social, que es tan importante para nosotros. Todo esto son áreas de investigación ahora mismo porque no lo hemos conseguido, ¿no?, artificialmente. Como he comentado, la inteligencia artificial existe aproximadamente desde el año 1950. Se puede considerar que Alan Turing fue el fundador de la inteligencia artificial cuando habló del test de Turing, que es un test que tendría que superar una máquina para ser considerada inteligente. Pero ya antes de Alan Turing, en 1842, Ada Byron o Ada Lovelace se puede considerar la primera programadora, y ella ya hablaba de un concepto muy similar a la inteligencia artificial. Se habla ahora mucho de la inteligencia artificial y sobre el futuro y cómo la inteligencia artificial va a dominar el mundo y nos vamos a morir todos. Entonces quiero aclarar un poco esta euforia que hay, ¿no?, porque soy experta en inteligencia artificial. La inteligencia artificial de hoy se llama inteligencia artificial débil, por algo se llamará así, o narrow, no sé cómo se dice en español, porque en realidad son sistemas que son muy capaces de hacer algo relativamente específico. Y la inteligencia artificial con la que interaccionamos hoy en día, con nuestros móviles, o los sistemas de reconocimiento de caras, o detección de caras, o de reconocimiento de habla, o el buscador de Google, o el sistema de Facebook, todos son sistemas de inteligencia artificial de este tipo. El siguiente hito es conseguir inteligencia artificial que se conoce como general, o amplia, donde la idea es tener un sistema mucho más amplio, que no solamente sabe de caras, o que no solamente sabe de voz, sino que sabe un poco de todo, ¿no?, como los humanos. Y ahí no estamos todavía. Y luego se habla de algo aún más allá, que se llama la superinteligencia artificial, donde la idea es que ¿por qué nos vamos a quedar aquí, donde estamos los humanos? Si tenemos capacidad de computación infinita y capacidad de almacenamiento infinito, no seríamos capaces a lo mejor de crear una inteligencia artificial que fuese mucho más inteligente que el más inteligente de los humanos del planeta, ¿no? Y este es un concepto que ahora es ciencia ficción, pero que es del que se habla también. Y como he dicho, hoy estamos aquí. Otro concepto que me interesa mucho transmitir es que cuando se habla de inteligencia artificial, el primer pensamiento es en un robot, Terminator, que va a ir por ahí, y creo que es muy importante entender que la robótica es un área dentro de la inteligencia artificial, pero que es un campo muy amplio en el que se intentan resolver muchísimos problemas. Y hoy, muy brevemente, voy a hablar de algunos de los avances que se están produciendo en muchas áreas más allá de la robótica, que también voy a mostrar un poquito de robótica. ¿Por qué estamos hablando tanto de inteligencia artificial estos días? Y no he hecho la búsqueda como has hecho tú, pero si buscas inteligencia artificial en la prensa, seguro que salen miles de entradas, ¿no? Es fundamentalmente por dos motivos. El primero es porque todavía se está cumpliendo lo que se conoce como la ley de Moore, que dice que hay un crecimiento exponencial en la capacidad de computación. De manera que cada vez tenemos capacidades de computaciones más altas, ¿no? Y de hecho, si se cumple la ley de Moore, que es cuestionable si se cumplirá o no, pronto podríamos tener una capacidad de computación superior a la del cerebro humano. Entonces, si posicionamos sistemas de inteligencia artificial a lo largo del tiempo, vemos que gracias a esta capacidad de computación se han ido pudiendo desarrollar. Deep Blue, en 1997, fue un sistema legendario de IBM porque fue el primer sistema que ganó al ajedrez a Kasparov. Este era uno de los hitos de la inteligencia artificial en los 90. Watson, que no sé si habéis oído hablar de él, en el 2011, también es un sistema que ha conseguido un hito, que es ganar en el juego de Jeopardy al mejor jugador de Jeopardy del mundo, ¿no? Jeopardy es un juego de preguntas y respuestas, como no sé cómo se llama en España, Sabelo todo, no sé, o algo así, o no sé cómo se llama. Y si veis el número de procesadores que tenía cada vez el sistema era más alto, ¿no? Y ahora de lo que se habla mucho es de Deep Learning, y no sé si lo habéis visto en la prensa, pero AlphaGo, que es un sistema de Deep Learning de una empresa que compró Google, ha ganado a uno de los campeones del mundo, Lee Segol, en Go. Y Go ha sido siempre uno de los holy grails en la inteligencia artificial, porque es un juego muchísimo más complejo que el ajedrez. Y el otro elemento que está permitiendo que la inteligencia artificial esté avanzando tanto es, por una parte, tenemos cada vez más capacidad de computación y, por otra parte, tenemos cada vez unas cantidades ingentes de datos. Es lo que se llama Big Data. Todos nosotros estamos generando datos todo el tiempo, ¿no? Porque vivimos en un mundo conectado, en un mundo digital, en el que se generan muchísimos datos. Entonces, estos datos y la capacidad de computación están permitiendo que desarrollemos unas técnicas de aprendizaje llamadas Deep Learning, que en realidad son una evolución de unas técnicas muy antiguas del principio de la inteligencia artificial, que son redes neuronales, pero que hace 10 años era inviable poder entrenar una red de este tipo. Pero hoy en día, porque tenemos muy buena capacidad de computación y tenemos muchos datos para alimentar estas redes, somos capaces de crear sistemas que reconocen imágenes mejor que un humano, o que reconocen el habla mejor que un humano. Eso antes era imposible, ¿no? Pensarlo.
Now I'm going to talk about 3 or 4 areas after this artificial card with which you use. Certainly, the first one is chatbots. Chatbots is one of the other areas in artificial intelligence, and these are systems where you can interact with texts and you talk with a person that will answer. It's inspired in Stuna when he created a test to differentiate a machine from a human being. It was that dialogue, this test, and if you were not able to tell the difference, that meant that it was an intelligent machine. And we have Alice. Alice is a chatbot quite popular, and then we have Eugene Guzman that is quite notorious, famous nowadays, and it's a teenager with personality and knowledge of age is probably one that is not as popular as Tay. Tay from Microsoft is this working problem solver that is predecessor of Twitter. He became a racist, a terrorist, and it was avoided in the networks. And another area very important in artificial intelligence is the personal assistant. This was the way they imagined the personal assistant in the future. Nowadays we all have this kind of feature in our mobile phones and smartphones. We have these personal assistants, we can Siri, Cortana, whatever, that you have on your mobile phone and that you can talk to and receive answers and personal assistant work. We have other professional assistant personal assistants that are not necessarily in a mobile phone that you use on the websites, and these are quite expensive. These are for IBM and for those working in research and other fields of investigation. You have open source. That is another option, another area where we are having quite important advantages and revolutionary sensors, algorithms are the affective informatic intelligence, and these are fundamental for our brain nowadays. And the challenge has always been to have a computer having our feelings or emotions, and nowadays we have many systems incorporating this kind of affective informatics that will allow the system to recognize, to have facial recognition or have facial expressions or physiological behaviors in our brain, so that what was tackled in her film is not far from the reality that we are living today. If you haven't seen this movie, I really recommend it. It's about the relationship between a human and an artificial intelligent system without a body, and it's quite interesting for me. It's just an operating system, and it's reacting in a very humanly way, and it's a movie that will make you think about the human feelings. Can you fall in love with an artificial intelligence? Yes or no? And lately we've had these humanoids that are robots having human appearance, and these are real images from our days. This is a receptionist in Japan that is a robot, and this is the first robot actress, and it is considered humanoid because, of course, as you can see, the appearance is quite human. And to finish, I'm going to talk about revolution thanks to technology, and is that our understanding not only about ourselves as individuals, but about our collective intelligence as society. And this given place to a new field that is the informatics social science, and this is mixing biology with technology. And for the first time from the beginning of the human history, we are able to have quantitative data of what we do, what we like, where we go, how do we interact as human beings. And this is a revolution that started 6 years ago, where we're validating or not sociological theories thanks to the existence of all these data about collective intelligence. So I'm going to finish with a thought, and I am convinced that we are redefining who we are as human beings. And as we develop this intimate relationship with technology, with a technology that is going to be even inside us, that will understand us, that will change us, that will provide us with extraordinary skills, we need to ask ourselves, what do we need to do so that this technology will really make us become even more human and reach us space. Thank you very much.
Era inteligencia artificial, pero claro.
Thank you very much. I see this, and then I wonder how much of it is real and how much of it is virtual. In a few years, we will watch Blade Runner, and we will say, "Oh, it is like
del futuro realmente."
Traditional movie. And yes, but of course, many of these is only at the research level, but the other part is a reality. Thank you very much. Before we go to the coffee break, we have a hashtag, Thinking Party 16. We've been trading topic from the 37-minute, and if you want to enter Twitter and comment on what the speaker's been saying, go ahead. And now we will have 20 minutes, half an hour to have a coffee break. Let's try to respect the schedule so that we can keep in touch for the second time. And of course, after we have a very interesting speech from Antonio Damasio. And let me tell you something, it is quite difficult to have such an important, relevant speaker. And we are twice as privileged because we have two of them today. Thank you very much. See you in half an hour.